Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today, I have Chief Penn from Arlington County PD in Virginia. He's in his 35th year in law enforcement, appointed chief in 2021, and wellness and employee development have been top priorities for him and his organization. Really looking forward to this conversation. So welcome to the show, Chief Penn. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm looking forward to it. I really kind of want to dive into the meat and potatoes with you kind of right away because I feel like we have so much to cover. So when you and I first connected, and I always write notes, and I was looking through my notes today and I had pages and pages of notes from our first conversation. And it was really apparent to me that wellness is something that's a priority and something that you guys are really taking action. And I was hoping you could explain a little bit about the why. Why is this something that was a priority to you? And how did this become a part of the conversation?
Sure. So, for me, it starts with, all police officers and public safety people we're human beings first. And we have the same problems in life that everybody has, but we ask folks to do a job that few will understand fully, few will be able to do it themselves. So, and we ask people to be exposed to a lot. And, when I first started in this profession in 1992, wellness was not a routine topic. It was more of the suck it up, go do your job. And I'm not being critical. It's just how things were back in the 90s. But, the goal for me is I want everybody to be well at work, be well at home, and be well through many, many years of retired life. And I think we have to be intentional about that. And we have to normalize this conversation and make it a part of every day, because we do ask a lot of people, and people are exposed to things that aren't really normal. And, I can say, there's a couple of incidents that really stood out for me. First, I was a responder at 9/11. And, after that, I didn't do anything. I just sucked it up and carried on. And when I was a homicide detective, we had an incident where 3 people were murdered. One was a child, and the child was the same age as my daughter at the time. And that was really hard for me. And when I look back, there was things that impacted me because I would avoid having to go to an autopsy of a child. I would avoid things when I could. And it didn't occur to me then. It occurs to me now that that was definitely something that I got exposed to that I probably did not process or handle as well as I could have. And, I honestly believe that none of us can do this job without the love and support of our friends and family. And when you get in a place where, something's really eating at you, a lot of times the reaction is, I don't want to burden my wife or my kids or my parents with this, so I just keep it in. But that has a chance to impact home because it's clear I'm keeping something in. I'm not sharing. But, so I think wellness as a conversation is something that has to be embedded in everything we do because, we ask a lot. People put a lot of themselves into this career. It's a noble profession, and we need to make sure we're taking care of people.
Thank you. And there's so many things you said in there that I want to kind of circle back to, but I agree with you. I think, when I can reflect on some of the hardest times in my life, we tend to isolate, especially when we don't want people to judge us or we don't want people to think that we're weak or, that we can't operate at a high level. We tend to kind of shove that down and isolate. And that does impact every aspect of our life. And I think it's incredibly relatable. I think everyone who's listening to this, we've all done that at some point in our lives or in our careers. And so for you to say, hey, we are trying to be intentional with what we do, and we're having the conversation on a consistent basis to normalize wellness and to integrate this into the day-to-day. And I really believe that conversations can save lives. I think the more we talk about it, the more normal and the more safe people are going to feel to then reach for the resources if and when they need it. But I think that in some parts, people are still afraid to have that conversation because, again, there's some vulnerability that goes into that, and people are viewing vulnerability as weakness, which in my eyes, vulnerability is strength. And so I love that you said intentional and normalize and having conversations about it.
Yeah, I mean, over the course of history, we've lost officers here to suicide. And, I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to make sure that people have the opportunity and they know they'll have the support to raise their hand and be like, not today, I need help. And that's okay, because it doesn't matter what we wear. Below all this is a normal human being that has ups and downs and things that happen. And like I said, I mean, a couple of things I mentioned, I never realized at the time that was a problem for me. But the older I get and when I look back, it's clear that they were. And, I clearly got through it, but it probably could have been a whole lot more successful had I raised my hand, and I just didn't.
Yeah.
But nobody did back then.
Well, I was going to say that I think that when you know better, you do better, and at the time, like, you didn't know that was even an option. It wasn't a part of the conversation. It was actually the opposite. It was like, rub dirt on it, kid, keep going. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
And so now that it is a part of the conversation, I find it really interesting that, there's a conversation now about the younger generation, right? Everyone's like, okay, the younger generation, they're more open, they're more receptive to these things, which I think is true. But I think it's in large part because you guys now as leadership are showing them that it's okay. You're having those conversations and you've learned from the things that you've gone through. And now that you know better, you can do better and you can provide that environment and that culture for the younger generation coming up to know that it's okay. So I think that it's a partnership, but I think that, leadership now is really kind of leading that path and that way for the younger generation to be successful.
I think it's huge and it's important. I mean, to have an effective wellness program, you have to mean it has to be sincere in that what I really want for people that work here is that they're well while they're here, they're well at home, and they live lots of years in retirement well. And that, just because somebody raises their hand and says, I'm struggling right now, doesn't mean their career's over, stifled. It just means, okay, maybe you need a little bit of time to get back to where you need to be and a little bit of help, but that's okay because we're all at the end of the day, we're all people.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, and I wanted to circle back to this, that you said it's really important that as an organization, your team understands that they have the support that they need. And that takes trust, right? And trust comes from showing in action that these things are actually going to happen, that as an agency, you are going to support people through their hard times. And you shared with me a story that I thought was pretty incredible. It was kind of a full circle story about someone who was struggling and kind of the whole journey that happened. Can you share a little bit about, this individual and, kind of the steps that you took as an organization and then what happened after?
Sure. Yeah, this was, I was a deputy chief in operations at the time. So it's, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And I was sitting in my office one night and I got a call from our employee assistance person who said, I need you to talk to somebody. I'm like, sure. Who? Well, I can't tell you. I'm like, well, I don't know what to do with that. But it turns out, the officer was in the hospital getting treatment, and she patched us together and we talked, and he explained that, he was suicidal, but for a split second of clarity, he may have ended his life. And, the message from me and the agency at the time was like, you need to focus on you right now. You need to get past this. You need to get well. And the agency's here for you. And I think, we have to do certain things. People have to be relieved of duty. I mean, that's all procedural, but the message really is we're going to stand by you and we're going to help you and we're going to provide resources that we can. We didn't have nearly as much back then, but, I think as an agency, we stood with him. And, when he was ready to come back to work, he did. He came back to work. He worked out the remaining years until he was to retire, and he retired, and he's well, and he's enjoying retirement and having a great time. I mean, I actually asked him before I shared this story if that was okay with him, and it was, because one of the really impactful things for our agency was when he came back, he was very forthcoming with the agency about what he'd been through and the fact that the agency stood by him and helped him through this time. And I think that was our first really, really large step in beginning to have this conversation and honestly have this conversation and openly have this conversation. So I really think the courage that he had to share his experience with our entire agency, and he actually shared it, regionally and with other law enforcement agencies, has been incredibly impactful in moving us all forward, because it does have to start with trust. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that the person get the help that they need. And, I think if that's where we're all focused, the how and when somebody comes back to work, all that works out. That's a different thing. But the number one is, how do we all help the person get well and be well while they're here and well when they retire? And, I think he did an incredible service to all of us here in being so open and sharing with what he went through.
Yeah. And of course, I want to talk about, some of the things that you're doing specifically in a little bit now, and kind of your wellness program. But I think it's really interesting. We talk about ROI a lot, right? Return on investment. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when we're talking about ROI, we think about money, right? I think it's natural. It's like, okay, if we're putting money into this program, what are we seeing in return? But that story you just told me, that's the ROI. Right? Like 100%. that is the biggest return on investment for you guys to give someone the support that they need in one of the hardest times of their lives, and for them to be able to come back happier, healthier, be able to complete their career and then enter into retirement and have a successful retirement. Like, what better ROI than that? And so I think sometimes we get so caught up in the dollars, but we have to remind ourselves that it's about the people. And so I love that story, because I think that's the best ROI story you can have.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is the return on investment, is that he didn't do anything and he got the help and he's living his best life in retirement. I mean, that's 100%. I mean, money's a part of the conversation to have resources, but to me, the real return on the investment is what you just said. Is are employees better off? Are they more well? Are they happier? And do they work their full time and be as happy in retirement as he is? That's really the return. The money's you got to find money to pay for this and pay for that. But I don't think you judge the effectiveness based on dollars and cents. We were fortunate to partner with the Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health for a few years. And, we did a lot of data there and it was looking at the return, but it was not necessarily from a dollar and cents. It was really from what helped people the most. Mm-hmm. Because it's not about the dollars. It's about what programs can we do, what things can we implement that are the most beneficial and most impactful to people. And that really helped us move along in, figuring out where the best place to put our effort and energy was. And best meaning that it had the most positive impact.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I was going to say is, what is the impact? What is the outcome, and how do we measure that, and is it that you are seeing less injuries? Is it that you are having people give testimonials saying this saved their life? What are those outcome metrics, and I think that that's important to remember. And sometimes we forget about that because I think we get so caught up in, in the dollars of it. But thank you for sharing that story. And I think that everyone who's listening, that's the goal, right? They all want to feel like they were able to give the people within their organization the resources that they need to not just survive. Of course, we want them to survive, but to thrive. And I think that the conversation these days is more about how do we raise that bar and how do we make sure that they get to the end of this thing, but how do we get to the end of this thing well? And how do we raise that bar? And so I know that you guys have been focusing a lot on your wellness program. And so I want you to kind of outline some of the successes and things that you are doing, because there are a lot of people who listen to this podcast that are looking for ideas or maybe, in infancy stages and they're trying to start somewhere. So can you give us some insights into things you guys are doing?
Sure. I think we started like most every other agency started many years ago, of just trying different things. And, we didn't know what we didn't know. So how do you know what's going to be effective? But the thought process really was, well, we just got to try. And if it doesn't work, then we pivot. We do something different. I mean, to me, the most important part of the wellness initiative was really that it is supported throughout the agency. It doesn't mean when you start a wellness program, there may be an eye roll or two that happen. But at the end of the day, I think success really hinges on that the top layers of the agency are all 100% committed to it, and committed to it but for the reason we just talked about, that the goal is that, when people hit hard times or just need some help, it's there for them and they can continue to do their chosen career and be well and have a happy family. So it starts to me with that level of support. When I was the interim chief, or maybe I had just become chief, we've always had 3 key initiatives that guide everything the agency does. But it was so important to me that I made it a 4th key initiative. So we added a key initiative of wellness and employee development to be intentional, to be something that's part of the daily conversation around here, because the key initiatives are always, they're normal things: crime control, prevention, transportation, safety. So we talk about them in community engagement, talk about them all the time, and wellness needs to be the same. It has to be something that is, you don't talk about it quarterly. You really need to focus on it regularly and daily and at every layer of the organization. So that's, I think, where we started. I was very fortunate to have a captain who was incredibly interested in it. And he really dove in and started with just taking our peer support team, which we had had for years, and formalizing that, creating policy procedure, getting it certified. So there's actually confidentiality. And it was important once we did that to create agency policy that, absent somebody saying something that's, of crime about to happen, or they're homicidal or suicidal, the members of that agency wouldn't tell the department. The peer support team don't have to tell the department, because the goal is to help that person. And I think that was another big step that shows that we're really prioritizing and valuing people's well-being. Is, I don't think the agency needs to know every little bit of what's going on in somebody's life. We just need to make sure that they're well and happy and are ready to do this job. So I think that was where it started. And this captain did an incredible amount of work moving us forward. Once we made it a key initiative, we really started building out. And one of the approaches we took here in Arlington, because we're not huge, is we approach wellness in a couple of different ways. The first is wellness across all 4 public safety agencies: police, fire, sheriff, and our emergency management and communications team. So there's a wellness initiative that's across all 4 agencies, and then we have internal too. So we started with trying to get clinicians to really be able to focus across public safety, to do some limited counseling and more referrals, educational programs, how do you sleep well, financial planning, all the things that hit all of us in our normal life. And it took a long time to get there, but we were ultimately able to get those positions funded. And we have 2 full-time clinicians and a paid intern now that focus exclusively on wellness across public safety. And I think that's really an important part of our overall program, because it brings consistency and redundancy across the different agencies. Some of the things, but we also have in the police department, where I explained initially was the captain who organized it all. But once we realized we wanted to be part of the daily conversation, we merged our wellness with training, because that's where your daily comes in. Our training section used to be combined with human resources, but it made more sense to us to make wellness and employee development one. I'm sure we all remember going through the COVID years. I mean, I saw more people struggling then, to include police officers, than I'd ever seen in 30 some years in this profession. And, it was clear that it was a time that we needed to step up our game and really focus. So creating that unit really has helped us and make this part of the conversation from day one. The minute you start this job, this is going to be part of the conversation here. And, I think most police departments had a lot of turnover during 2021, 2022. So we're not immune from that. Over a 4 or 5 year period, we had, 2,500 years of law enforcement experience, retired and moved on. So we have a lot of new folks. So really investing in wellness and their development from the beginning, I think has really been important to keep us moving forward in a positive direction. And, there's several things they do within that, but a lot of it is bringing wellness into training. I think that's important.
Yeah. I want to touch I want to touch on just that one part, because I have asked this question. If you go back a year ago on this podcast, I have asked chiefs this question. Do you think that wellness and training will just be one thing? Like, will it just be training? It's just wellness is a part of training. Like, that's what it is. And I've had mixed reviews of like, yes. And, or like maybe someday. And I love that that's something that you guys are doing, because when we look at, and I draw a lot of parallels to professional athleticism, right? I think that you guys are professional tactical athletes, and I take a look at how professional athletes train. If you look at professional athletes and how they train, they don't say, okay, I'm going to do training and then I'm going to do wellness. It's like, this is my training regimen. And wellness, sleep, nutrition, all the things that they do, mental training, it's all just a part of training for the job. And so I love that you're like, we're combining the two. And I think it's a really smart way to break stigma as well. So it doesn't feel like there's two that are separated. It's like, this is all combined. Wellness and training are one unit, and we're operating in that way. And we're going to have things intertwining with each other to make it feel more normal.
Now, we also were intentional about employee development instead of training, because it's not just your initial training when you're a new officer, a new member of the agency. It spans throughout the career. So it's, the wording there was important, that it's, we really focus when new officers join the agency, but employee development happens throughout your 25, 35 years. So it's really the gamut of a career. And we created, leadership programs for different levels of how people step through their career, leader of self, leader of others. And it gives us opportunities to continue to get together and talk about leadership. But wellness is a part of leadership. Wellness is an obligation of leadership, in my opinion. I think if you're a leader in an organization, we have an absolute obligation to do the very best we can to make sure that people have the resources and training and skills necessary to be effective in their job and to be well. And I think that merging the two together, I think, moves us further down the train with that.
Yeah, I love it. I did have a question for implementation. So, and I'm going to ask like a chicken or egg question here.
Okay.
So you said that you guys, at least in the beginning, you were like, we weren't afraid to try things. We were trial and error, see what works, see what doesn't. How did you approach buy-in? Was it that you felt like you needed to get buy-in first to then implement things? Or did you feel like you would implement things and buy-in would come from it? Because I know you said sometimes there's a little eye roll, a little resistance to some things. So chicken or egg, buy-in first and then implement, or implement and that creates buy-in?
I think it's a little bit of both, maybe. I think starting the conversation and the commitment to wellness as a priority and a key and a priority, I think, is important. But I would not let buy-in. You're never going to get complete buy-in on anything you do. So I think starting the conversation, demonstrate the commitment to the concept, and then start doing things. But a lot of the ROI is you got to get feedback from the people that we're creating these programs for. Do you find value in this? If you don't find value in it, then we shouldn't waste our time and our resources on something if it's not of value. So there has to be a dialogue. And, even if you start something without full buy-in and 20 members of your agency participate in it, that's 20 members of your agency that are participating in it. Mm-hmm. And in time, it will grow. If it's one of the topical areas that people say, yeah, there's definitely value here. I don't think there's a defined formula to how you get there. I think you should never be afraid to try something and be open to the feedback. If people think it's great, that's wonderful, but everything can be improved. Mm-hmm. So if you start with, two or three things and you get feedback that number three, I get rid of that. Number one, I do this. Then, that's important feedback because the program is for the people that work in your agency. So it needs to be what the people in your agency want and need.
Yeah.
So I think the back and forth is important. I mean, we've done some surveys, we've got feedback. I mean, everything we tried in the beginning didn't stick, but that's okay. And it didn't stick because you could see that, the enrollment wasn't real high or people didn't use this resource. And then you get feedback and then, I get it. Resources are limited, but I never wanted us to waste our limited resources and our energy on something that wasn't really of value.
Sure.
But how do you define value? I think the best way to define value is ask people, did you find that valuable?
Yeah.
And would you come to it again? And would you tell your friends about it?
Yeah. And I love that you said understanding that in the beginning, you might not get full buy-in, but it can grow. We're always going to see a subsect of people who kind of gravitate towards things. And then the hope is that they become the canaries and they find benefit and they talk about it. And then other people want to try it. And then it's, kind of that ripple effect that happens from there. And you're right. And if that doesn't happen and it falls flat, then scrap it and move on. So I love it. We
always started with an idea of a smorgasbord because I think we all believe that there's no one thing that fits everybody. Mm-hmm. So we have our public safety wellness who do a lot of educational topics, some surveys, different programs, some counseling. We have our partnership with the Cummings Foundation I mentioned, where they actually did medical screenings, nutritionist, a physical trainer, and donated a lot of energy and resources to our agency, which we're incredibly thankful for. And it helped us move it along because they started us on the data-driven piece of what's working, what's not working. What do people find valuable? What do they not find valuable? We really have increased the size of our chaplain program because a lot of people would prefer a religious leader to talk to. And it's important to have a host of different opportunities for people because a person might have no interest in talking to this person, but they might this person. So it was important just to have a wide breadth of things. And we've had, therapy dogs, facility dog, because that's always another positive thing. And one thing we did that I think was unique is we contracted to bring in a cognitive performance specialist, so human performance. Cool. And, he's embedded in the agency full time. And his job is to meet with anybody who wants to meet about resilience, team building, how to be the best you can be. And, that was one of those areas that we didn't know in the beginning how people would feel about it. But, people go to him all the time now about work stuff, not work stuff. And he really focuses on how do you as a member be the best you can be, and how do we, the collective, be the best we can be. So I found that to be incredibly impactful as part of our overall program as well.
Yeah. Thank you. I used to call it a charcuterie board, and then someone told mm-hmm. me that was too hard for people to pronounce and that we should call it a buffet.
A buffet's better because I don't even know how to spell smorgasbord. That's what I usually say.
One of the things you told me offline that kind of stuck out to me was you said, you kind of outlined all the things. You're like, we're doing these things. But you said at the end, you're like, we're not finished. We're not done. We want to keep going. We want to keep adding. And so how do you maintain that mentality of that it's not a destination? How do you keep pushing to be creative and to add new things instead of just kind of like check the box and we're done?
So I think there's always more you can do. And the way you learn that is by what are you doing that's get a lot of participation? What are you doing that's not? And then talk to people and get feedback. One of the areas we're really focusing on now is how do we build a bridge that incorporates people's families a little bit more? Because being a family member of a first responder or police officer is not really easy either. So how can we be there for them a little bit more and create a resource place where, if I come home and I'm not acting right and this lasts for a few weeks, where could my family member go to for some resources if they're not ready to make a phone call, because I think family members would be concerned to call an employer because what's going to happen. I get that. But I think it's important to build this bridge. So like when our new officers graduate the academy, before graduation, the family members meet with our 2 wellness clinicians. And, it's important to start this from the very beginning. So they get an opportunity then to tell the family what all we offer to make sure that their loved one is going to be taken care of the best we can. But we're also there for them. Mm-hmm. And that's one of our focus areas now is how do we continue to grow? Because I think, like I said in the beginning, I don't think any of us really can do this job well without the love and support of our family. So, and it is impactful on families to have a family member that's in this profession. So how do we do more there? That's our current focus right now. But, how do you identify what's next? I don't really have a good answer for that. I think it's, I think a lot of that comes from conversations, surveys. What is it that you would find beneficial that we currently don't have?
Yeah.
And look into that.
I think it's a mindset.
I don't pretend to have all the best ideas. I think to do it well, it has to be a community conversation about what's going to be the best for our agency right now.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also a mindset, it's like how can we always have the mindset of wanting to be better, of wanting to improve? How do we ask questions? What is working? What isn't working? To your point, how can we keep it a part of the conversation? And I think when you have that mindset, you start to see things, when you're always trying to discover, okay, like what's working, what isn't, what's better, like how can we improve? Then your mind is going to find those things, and those conversations are going to come up. And so the effort that you talked about earlier of, trying to make this normal and trying to have that conversation consistently, I think that helps with that mindset rather than, oh, we got to create a wellness program. Okay, we're going to have these 3 things, check the box, and then that's the end of the conversation. You guys are continuously having that conversation. So I appreciate everything that you shared.
Anything that's perceived to me as checking the box, I mean, cops are going to see right through that right away, if I'm being honest. So that's why earlier I said, it has to be genuine. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be genuine and it has to be fully supported. And it has to be, look, we're doing the best we can. We want your feedback. We want your input, because if everybody's waiting for me to have all the best ideas, it's going to be a long wait. So the more it's a conversation, the better your program could be. And when we partner with the foundation, they really helped us with how to evaluate, I think all of us were in the same spot 10 years ago. It's like, I don't know, try that, try this, but try something, but is it doing what you hope it would do? And it's important to have some idea of what you are hoping to see out of it in the beginning. And then did it do that after a year or 2 years or whatever? And what's the feedback from your members? Do they find value in it? Because if they don't find value, then you're sort of wasting your time.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate everything you shared. And, I think there's a lot of really good information for other leaders out there who are trying to evolve or trying to build their wellness program. My final question for you is for the younger generation, the younger men and women who are coming into this career today that will inevitably be, tomorrow's leaders. What words of wisdom would you share with them that maybe you wish you would have known when you were younger?
I think there's several different things. I think that, never forget why. Your why. Why'd you join this profession, this career? I mean, at the end of the day, what you do matters every day. It impacts people's lives. And every job's not like that. But, when you go out in the community, what you do makes a difference. So it's important to never forget that. Never lose touch with why you chose this career. And make sure you find the joy in what you do every day. It's there. Some days it might be a little harder to find than others. I get it. But this is an incredibly noble profession. But at the same time, remember that a lot is asked of you. So you have to pause, you have to slow down, and you have to take care of yourself and take care of your coworkers and take care of your family. And if you're struggling, raise your hand. and say, I need some help. I mean, I can't think of anybody anywhere that wouldn't rather get you help than something tragic happen. So, it's an incredible profession. I've done it for almost 34, just started my 35th year. And I've stayed because I always felt like what I did made a difference. It doesn't mean there's not challenges that come with it, but I think the big message is always find the joy. Remember why you're doing this, but pause and take care of yourself. Ask for help when you need it.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and coming on here today and talking about all the things you guys are doing organizationally and sharing your words of wisdom. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.